In this video series, we've gone over how to keep your readers reading. Again, that's what we want. We want our readers to keep reading, keep turning pages until they get to the end, and then we want them to read it again. We want them to keep coming back to our stories again and again, so that our stories can become a foundational part of their reading identity. That's how our stories last through time, because they become a part of who our readers want to be. They help them make decisions. They help change the world through the actions that our readers take as a result of having interacted with the story that we've created and taken in our signal. So it's critical that we create these masterworks because that's what the world needs. The world needs us to tell the stories, the things that we have to say. The reader needs our signal to make the best decisions possible. So in pursuit of that goal, we've gone over 3 tools. We have the protagonist as outputter. That's our on-the-surface concrete tool that helps our reader to connect to our protagonist and care what happens to them. Then we've met Sam. And Sam, as part of our narrative device, Sam is someone who shares a problem with the protagonist. And so understanding Sam makes sure that we understand exactly who we're telling the story to so that we can have a clear, comprehensive understanding of our audience and what they need to hear in order to connect with our writing and keep reading to the end. And finally, we took this up to the blue level and looked at relevance filtering. So this is about taking the double factor problem and making sure that everyone in our story universe and every word on the page connects to that double factor problem so that our audience can relate to everything that's going on in our story, so that our story can resonate as a whole, and so that our protagonist's actions within this arena can be relevant to empowering our audience to solve the problems that they face every day. So with these 3 tools, let's take a look at an example and how this plays out in an actual masterwork. Here at StoryGrid, we love to study masterworks, and one of our favorites is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And The Hobbit is a great example of the concepts that we've been talking about. So we have the protagonist, and that's Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbit of the title. And he is someone who lives in the Shire. He loves his Hobbit hole. I mean, the Hobbit hole is a great place to live. Trust me, I would love to live there. But he lives in this hole, and then he has to decide when Gandalf comes to him with the proposition of adventure, whether he's going to go out and help the dwarves reclaim their lost home and their treasure and fight a dragon and all of that exciting stuff, or whether he's going to stay at home in the Shire. So ultimately, Bilbo is facing the decision of whether he stays in the Shire or goes on an adventure. Next, we have our Sam for The Hobbit. And The Hobbit has such a fun narrative device. So Tolkien has hired his author, and we'll talk about who that is, to tell the story to a child. And we see evidence for this all over The Hobbit. Even in that first scene, we can see in the introductory passage how Tolkien is saying that he and Sam, the person that he's speaking to, how they're the big people, and that hobbits stay away from the big people, and that we may never have seen them, but they're there, those kinds of things. And it's clear that he's talking to someone as though he is reading a bedtime story. And actually, that's how The Hobbit came about and The Lord of the Rings came about, was through him telling stories to his son. So we have a grandfatherly type of figure as the author, who's Tolkien's choice for telling this story to the Sam, who is a child. And this is an example of how we can see what the right persona is. So there are a lot of battles in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings, battles all over the place. In The Hobbit ends with the war, with the wargs and the goblins, and they end up defeated and they're not on the way to wreck the Shire. But there is a war. Now, Tolkien had a lot of experience with war. He fought in World War I, and he had a lot of experience being a soldier. But he didn't choose to tell the story from that soldierly perspective because to communicate his story to a child, he understood that having the wisdom of ages out of battle, having that kind persona, that the caring and loving tone of a grandfather was better to communicate the message that he wanted to impart in The Hobbit. And of course, we have the third part of our narrative device, and that is the double factor problem. Now, we touched on this a little bit when we talked about what Bilbo has to do. So does he stay in the Shire, or does he go and fight the dragon? And what we see is that really what it is he loves his home. He loves his home. He loves the idea of being a hobbit and the strong family traditions that he has. All of those are parts of having a home base. But what we see is that you can't have a stable home if you stay in it all the time, because there are threats from outside. So he's balancing the security of the home with the exploration of having to go out and defend the home and, make sure that the world isn't falling apart so that it's going to come and affect your home base. So he's balancing security and exploration. And this is perfect because these are two foundational concepts in psychology, that these are the two things that we have to balance, right? When do we prioritize security and when do we prioritize exploration? And Bilbo is doing those to figure out how he can best secure his home. So he's balancing those two factors of security and exploration. And Sam, right, is the child, and Sam is undergoing psychological development and figuring out the balance of those two factors for herself. And so it's a perfect parallel as she tries to navigate this world through figuring out when to stay home and when to go out and have adventures and be brave. Those are the same things that she's seeing Bilbo go through. And then finally, that brings us to the double factor problem. Now, we've talked about what those two factors are, and now we have to look at, well, do the other avatars in The Hobbit undergo those same choices? And they do. So we have the dwarves. Now, Thorin is obsessed with his home and his lineage and all of the manifestations of security. He wants nothing more than to get the Arkenstone, and he's willing to undermine everything that he has, all of the friends that he makes along the way, all of the potential alliances. All he wants is the Arkenstone, and he wants his title back, and he wants his mountain back. He wants to be king under the mountain, and he wants to have a secure home. And so he has that same object of desire is his object of desire is home. But what he wants to do is wreak vengeance on anyone who would take that from him. So he really goes he's trying to balance the security of what he already has with going out and fighting to regain what he lost. And, ultimately he comes down on the side of vengeance. And that is taking the idea of fighting for one's home and defending it and taking it to the extreme. And we see that Thorin meets a bad end because he makes that decision. And Smaug also is someone who is obsessed with his home. He's a dragon. He hoards, right? In hoarding, right? He creates this base and creates a stronghold that he sits in and defends from within, instead of having any sort of communication with the outside world, any sort of alliances and connections. Again, connections and the ability to work with people and to form meaningful life and to find the reasons for being that we have when we connect with other people. Those fall away when we go to one extreme or the other. And of course, we can see all of the other avatars in The Hobbit going through the same thing. So Smaug and Thorin are both great examples. We have all of the other dwarves. We have Beorn, who finds a nice balance for himself between defending his territory and helping others and making sure that the system as a whole is safe. We have Gandalf, who, through being a wanderer, creates safe havens around the world. We have Thorin's father that we hear about. So we have all of these different avatars, and Gollum, right? Gollum, who is obsessed with his own kind of hidey hole where he has the ring. And so all of these people are trying to figure out how they can best carve out a home for themselves in the story universe, and they're doing it through weighing security and exploration, and they come down on different parts of that spectrum, and all of this illustrates for Bilbo whether he needs to be out here having adventures, solving the problems of the world so that he can, have a place in it, have a place in time, and have a legacy, or whether he needs to stay home in the Shire and just keep to himself. So he ultimately finds a great way of balancing those two things. And hopefully when we read The Hobbit, we can find out a little bit more about when we need to take a risk and leave our homes and have an adventure so that we can help other people on their quest for their homes and make the world a better place. And when we need to stay at home in the Shire, which is such a lovely place to be. And so Tolkien really empowers us to navigate our balance between security and exploration just a little bit better. So I hope that going through that example gave you a little bit of insight into how these concepts work at every level of storytelling. And that's just really scratching the surface of what we have to offer here at StoryGrid. In the StoryGrid Guild, we go over all of these tools in depth and more. So we have all of these different parts of our toolkit at all these different levels that help us to not only think about these concepts, but really formalize how to put them into practice. And we have 3 different types of beats that we go over in detail that help us to understand how to enact these things on the page. So I hope that you learned a lot from these trainings about how to keep readers reading. And I hope that you can find some excitement in that this is just scratching the surface. And there's so much more to learn about how to keep your readers reading, how to keep your signal coming across to them, and how to create masterworks that are going to last through time.